This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
Hello, college basketball fans, and welcome to the Primetime Podcast. My name is Ricky Widmer, and as always, I'm joined by the one, the only, Brandon Swanson.
Hey.
And Brandon, this is, I feel like for the last few weeks I've been bringing this up, but this week I can finally say it. This of the season is our first just college basketball podcast. We have no football whatsoever, not planning on touching the pigskins today.
No, we are not. We had a wonderful college football season, but moving on to college basketball, which is really, really good.
Well, and I mean, we already touched on last week there's no dominant team. This is a weird season in college basketball. No dominant team, and more importantly, you brought up before we hit the record button, Brandon, was, you know what, one of the conferences that has kind of been a surprise this year of how well most of their teams are is the Big 12. So we're going to get into some Big 12 basketball. We're also going to talk about how the Villanova might be underrated. And then where the hell did Indiana basketball come from? Because I didn't see this coming. But with that Big 12 that I mentioned, here are the top teams top teams according to me, based off their conference record. 5-1 Baylor. 4-2 we have Oklahoma, Kansas, Western Virginia, and Texas. Then Iowa State at 3-3. The rest are 2-4 and under at 1-5. So that's a majority. Only 4 teams under 500 in the conference 6 games in.
I think that's great. I mean, but where did this Big 12 come from? I mean, I did not expect, and I was just talking with a good friend of mine,
Oklahoma and Kansas were the only two.
Also didn't even expect it coming into this season. Mm-hmm. Like, really, where did this conference come from this year? Because you've got Oklahoma, a top team. Mm-hmm. Okay, so right now, obviously they lose. We're probably going to see North Carolina up there. Yeah. You've got Kansas. You've got West Virginia. You've got Iowa State. You've got all of these. I mean, even here, I was going to say, even Texas.
Here was my thought coming in, and 2 of those teams you mentioned, Texas and Iowa State, they were a huge question mark to me coming into the season. Because, Brandon, what did both of those teams have in common this offseason? They both got new what? Head coaches. Shaka Smart coming in, Steve Prohm from Murray State coming in to be the hopefully new mayor of Ames. However, I don't think anyone in Ames, Iowa is taking the nickname the mayor away from Fred Hoiberg, coach of our Chicago Bulls right in our backyard, anytime soon. But they were kind of a question mark to me, especially Texas. I mean, early on I'm thinking, okay, that's a good hire. That's Shaka Smart. That's going to do things. Later on, when I did my Final Four prediction, I said, what the hell, let's put them in there because Shaka's going to get these boys ready to play. But that was kind of the ballsy roll the dice. Will it really happen? Probably not, but I'm going to say it because it could. And then Iowa State, it's like, okay, you're still a good team. You still got Niang out there, your star player. Probably going to be a top NBA prospect when we get closer to the NBA draft this June. However, new head coach, Fred Hoiberg's gone. Can Iowa State still be Iowa State? So really coming into the season, I was only thinking Oklahoma and Kansas, maybe West Virginia, Baylor. 4 teams with 2 elites in the conference. That was my first thought.
Baylor, another team that has looked good this year. I mean, we're going to see a really good matchup coming up tomorrow, Oklahoma, Baylor. We're going to see some really good teams taking off against each other. And what I think is really interesting, you look back to last year, I think if you would have said, Oklahoma and Baylor are playing, everyone would have gone, no one cares. I think that is why it's so interesting to really follow these teams, because one team one year can just, boom, all of a sudden, they're on the map. And they're not just on the map. They are at the forefront.
Well, and I mean, most Baylor fans, if you're a Baylor fan listening, you may go, whoa, guys, Baylor was no joke last year. They were a 24-9 team, and let's be honest, most people had them winning their first round game against Georgia State. However,
Didn't happen.
They ran into the coach's son, R.J. Hunter, and Georgia State, and got the 1-point loss last year in the tournament. But with Baylor, I look at their schedule, Brandon. You brought up the Oklahoma game happening this weekend. But from February 16th to March 5th, here's the remaining schedule to their regular season. You ready for it?
Let's hear it.
At home against Iowa State, right now 19. Could go up. Then they go on the road to play Shaka Smart's Longhorns. Then they come back home to play Kansas. Going to be a top 5 team. We can just throw it in there. They're going to be a top 5 team, maybe even a top 3 team. Right now they're at number 3. Then they go on the road, TCU, okay, kind of an easy game. Then they go on the road at number 1 Oklahoma, right now number 1 Oklahoma. And then they come home to play West Virginia. So there's 5 of the 6 that we mentioned that are going to be, that they're all tournament teams to me. Iowa State, Kansas, Oklahoma, West Virginia, going to be in the tournament. Texas is that bubble team. What can they do the rest of the season to get into the tournament? They're the bubble team.
To be quite honest with you, I think that game at Texas may be one of the most difficult games that Baylor will play.
Well, that may be the bubble
because
game.
we remember, folks, earlier on in the season, North Carolina playing at Texas. They probably thought, we're going to go in here. Texas may give us a little bit of a run for a little bit, but then we will take off. Didn't happen. Did not happen. Texas hung with them the whole way. Game-winning shot. They won. I mean, I don't know if that will necessarily happen against Baylor, but Baylor's got to watch out because Texas is definitely a team to be taken a look at. They have played very well in the big games this year.
Well, and right now, I'm looking at Joe Lunardi, ESPN bracketologist, and how he has it laid down. Baylor right now on his latest bracket is a 6 seed. He has them in the South region, whereas Texas, one of the last 4 byes. So right now, he's got both in. He's got both in. Texas would be a play-in game. Texas is 11th in the West. So 11th seed for Texas, 6th seed for Baylor. Texas could be, to me, I feel like that's going to be the game, Baylor and Texas. The loser has to do something in the conference tournament to make the actual NCAA tournament.
I think you're right. I would probably agree with that. I don't know, though, but if the loser is Baylor, do they have to do as much? Do they have to do as much? I mean, if it was Texas, if Texas were to lose that, they would have to be the team that the pressure would be on them. I don't know if it would be as much on Baylor because they were already ranked, but and ranked right in the middle of the pack. But I'm really excited by this Big 12 conference this year. I mean, I cannot believe the amount of talented teams we have coming out of it.
And I will pose the question to you. Baylor almost lost this past week to Kansas State, however, used 2 overtimes to win 79-72. And they have some games where maybe if they lose, it's a hard loss. If they lose against Texas Tech or Kansas State, or if they lose to a Georgia team, because I don't think Georgia's that great of a quality opponent. If they lose to one of those teams, maybe you're saying, okay, that's a bad loss. However, there are only 3 losses. Second game of the year at 25 Oregon. Then they lost on the road at number 24 Texas A&M. I want to get to them in a second. And then they lost to number 2 Kansas and just got run out of the gym by Kansas 102-74. But I want to ask you this, Brandon. We have a listener here with Most Valuable Podcast who is a huge Texas A&M fan. And he's been the last few weeks just egging us on, talk about the Aggies. I want to mention this, and I want to get your opinion because I kind of mentioned it in our rankings for this past week. I'll ask you plain and simple. Do the Aggies deserve respect? And if so, to bring it back to our Big 12 conversation, is that a good win or a good loss, however, for Baylor?
Which one do you want first?
Give me the Aggie one first. We'll lead it back into the Baylor.
Okay.
Give me the Aggie one. Do they deserve respect?
Well, I think that they do. I think that at the end of the day, they do. I mean, if you look at their schedule and you look what they've done, they beat Texas early on in the season. They beat Gonzaga early on in the season by 1 point. They lose to Syracuse. Tough game there.
Without Jim Boeheim.
They did indeed do that. They beat Baylor 80-61. I think that they do deserve some respect right now. I think that you have to look and see what they do throughout the rest of the season, especially against, obviously, the ranked teams. They'll have South Carolina towards the bottom. They'll have Kentucky towards the bottom.
They'll be hosting the Cyclones of Ames coming up in the end of January.
That's going to be, I think right now, that's the biggest game for them.
Is beating, because Iowa State's going to climb, because they're 19, but they were 19 before they beat number 1.
Yeah.
So they're going to climb. But so you're saying they deserve respect. Let's bring it back to the Big 12. Is that loss for Baylor okay, it was a loss, but it was to a quality team, so we're not going to knock them?
I think that's usually what happens, isn't it?
Because
if you have a loss, if it's a quality team, you have to knock them a little bit, but you can't do it a lot.
Because here's the way I see it, and I said this in our video: who have you beaten when it came to the Aggies? Yeah, they beat Texas, but that was like Texas was still finding itself early in the year. It wasn't until I think the North Carolina win that Texas was like, okay, we kind of know who we are, and then.
So you're saying that if they played them tomorrow
and beat
it'd be
them,
a completely different game.
Yeah, well, not a different game. I'm saying if Texas A&M played Texas tomorrow and beat the Longhorns, I'd be sitting there going, okay, that's a quality win. Because they beat them November 25th was when the Aggies beat Texas. Texas didn't get their win over number 3 North Carolina until December 12th. And I know that you guys listening are going to say, but Ricky, the 29th, January 2nd, and January 9th, they went 1 of 3 in there. However, they then began to find themselves beating Iowa State, beating Oklahoma State, that's a kind of an easy win, and then beating West Virginia. What can they do against Kansas in their next game? That's going to be the true test. So that Texas game, I go, okay, you beat Baylor, good. You beat Gonzaga, okay, good, but really Gonzaga to me has always been the team, yeah, you're good, but you're only good because of the conference you play in. You wreck your conference, you go to the tournament, and then Adam Morrison cries because you lose to UCLA.
Oh, do not bring it back to him.
Every other team that has been mentioned, Georgia, not a good opponent to me. LSU, who cares? You beat Ben Simmons. He's going to be in the NBA anyways. LSU will probably make the tournament just so they can make a little extra moolah in March because people will tune in to see Ben Simmons or whoever they're saying, the LeBron James of basketball. No, the LeBron James of college wouldn't have gone to college because LeBron went straight from high school to the pro. So that's me where the Aggies stand. But I'm going to get off my soapbox. We're going to get back to this Big 12 conversation. And one team we have not touched that I want to touch right now, West Virginia. They beat number 1 Kansas 74-63 back on July 12th. However, Brandon, these Mountaineers have lost 2 straight against Oklahoma 70-68. They almost beat Oklahoma. So they almost beat number 1, then almost beat number 2 that next Saturday. However, they lost against Oklahoma. Now this past Wednesday, lost to Texas 56-49.
They didn't just lose to Texas. They lost to Texas at home. So I don't know if that's maybe
a place they've only lost once before that to Virginia.
I was just going to say maybe this West Virginia team isn't as good as people thought, or this Texas team is highly underrated. I think it's it's one of two things right there.
And they have a similar kind of meat to their schedule. They have they have 7 games, 6 of them being like, if I'm Bob Huggins, I'm circling that part of the schedule. Because from February 2nd to February 9th, at Iowa State, home against Baylor, at Kansas. Then on the 13th, you play your gimme win against TCU. Cool. Then from the 15th to the 22nd of February, at Texas, home against Oklahoma, home against Iowa State. How are you going to do in those 6 games? That will prove to me if you're a tournament team.
That's what it comes down to. That's what it always comes down to, because you can't, it's really hard. I mean, it's really hard to look at a team from one game and go, oh, they're really good, they're really bad. Mm-hmm. It's got to be a stretch. And I think you're right. You talk about that stretch of those games, that's where you're really able to analyze a team. Analyze what's good about them, what's bad about them. Are they for real or are they not? Are they coming with their fake ID?
Well, can I ask you this then? Because that leads amazingly into the next thing that I was going to bring up. You say the fake ID. You're obviously making a joke at Iowa, Cow and Cowherd. Me saying that Iowa, I disagree with the cow turd from football season. But I'm going to ask you this. This was Joe Lunardi's bracketology that he released, came out with this past Monday. It was the 18th. It was released in between losses to Oklahoma and Texas. So that Texas loss was not in this ranking. However, after that loss to Texas, Joe Lunardi had West Virginia as a 2-seeded team in the NCAA tournament. After losing to Texas, where do you put them? Keep them at 2, move them to 3, 4, or beyond?
I think after the loss to Texas, I probably bump them to 4. I probably bump them to 4 until they can win a couple of these big games.
Because
that's why I do it, because the loss to Texas, an unranked Texas team at home, I don't think the bump to 4 is that drastic. Mm-hmm. I think if you're going 5 beyond that's a little much. But I think the bump from 2 to 4. But if they they go and they beat ISU, they beat Baylor, they beat Kansas, they're back up to 2.
Here's the last thing I want to mention before we move on into Villanova, because we're talking about bracketology and seeding, and that leads great into our Villanova conversation. But last thing I want to do, I'm just going to mention the Big 12 team and where Joe Lunardi has them, and we're going to say as of right now, is that where we'd put them, or would we put them somewhere else? We'll start Oklahoma. He's got them as a 1 seed in the South. They'd start off playing in Oklahoma City their first 2 games.
Oh, yeah.
So they're a 1 seed.
Absolutely,
the other 1
I agree.
seed from the Big 12, Kansas. Are they going to be a 1 seed? Are both these teams going to be a 1 seed at the end? I like how he's got Oklahoma in the South. They play their first mini region of first 2 games is in Oklahoma City. Then you've got Kansas in the Midwest. Their first 2 games would be in Des Moines, Iowa. So he's kind of playing the regional game there a little bit. Are both these teams, would you put both of them at number 1?
Believe it or not, a little piece of me wants to put Kansas at 2.
Even though they are a top 4 team in the rankings.
Yeah, that's why it's a little piece of me, but I'll say keep them at 1, yeah.
How about Baylor? He's got them right now 6 seed in the tournament. To me, I'm thinking maybe, right now, maybe a 5 if you want to move them up. However, that the win over Kansas State really helped their case. Because if they lose to Kansas State, boom, they're an 8-9. They're playing an 8-9 game, you win, you play a 1. That's how I see it.
I'd say 5.
So you're going to move them up to a 5. Joe Lunardi, like I said, has them at number 6. The next Big 12 team, number 5, Iowa State, a 5 seed in the West.
I'm actually going to move them to a 3.
Yeah, you got them. I was going to say 4 because, with us, they beat Oklahoma after these came out, so maybe they're going to move up. But, yeah, I was going to move them to a 4. You said a 3 after they beat Oklahoma?
Yeah.
Because really...
It's not just for that Oklahoma win. I think Iowa State's actually played well. Mm-hmm. I didn't expect them to come out and play as... It's like they had no drop-off after last year, even with the loss of their head coach. Good team. They're talented. They beat number 1. Yeah, I'd put them at a 3.
The next one, 11, I'd move them up to a 9 because they beat West Virginia, Texas. He had them 11 entering this week. Now that they beat West Virginia, I'd move them up from 11 to 9.
I'd keep
a 9-seeded team.
I'd keep them at an even 10 right now.
I just, something about this Texas team, I feel like it would be great to see them in an 8-9 matchup. Because just a tip for you guys, Ricky Widmer pro tip number 1 for filling out your brackets this March. The 8-9 games, don't sweat it. Just flip a coin. Because they're 50-50 half the time. It doesn't matter who you pick to win those games because you could just flip a coin and it'll work better than you just eeny, meeny, miny, mowing it. Either way works. Just don't stress out about the 8-9 because they're impossible games to pick 100% right because they are the closest to a 50-50 percentage out of any other seeding. We talked about them. West Virginia, you said you'd move them down to a 4, you said?
Yeah.
I'll move them down to a 3. Only that one. I know you guys are sitting there at home going, but Ricky, you want to move Texas up from 11 to 9, but only West Virginia down 1. And the way I see it is I'm looking at this as a seeding. If you look at this past Wednesday's game, Texas, an 11 seed, beat a 2 seed. And you may be sitting there going, okay, I can buy that because guess what? That if that happened, that would be an actual Sweet 16 matchup, 11 v 2. So basically, Texas just beat number 2 West Virginia in the Sweet 16 this week in Joe Lunardi's bracket. And then, last but not least, he's even got one team that we didn't even mention, Brandon. You ready for it? Number 11, an 11 seed in the East, Texas Tech. They're a team that's 2-4 in conference right now, 12-5 overall this year. Some of the big wins and losses for them, their losses, they lost to number 16 Utah at home, well, neutral site. They lost 4 in a row to Iowa State, Kansas, Kansas State, and Baylor. And their key wins, Texas, yeah, that's the only key win I'll throw in there. I'm shocked they're even in Lunardi's bracket because I wouldn't have them in the bracket at all. Would not have them in at all.
Yeah, I mean, but there's always teams like a Texas Tech team and stuff like that make it in there, and you're going, they had an okay season. I guess I can see why they're there, but I'll stick with where he's got them.